I'm Catherine Arndt, the Chief of the VLGA Connect Studio. Welcome to today's episode, brought to you by the VLGA, your councillor support network and the national broadcaster on all things local government.
Hello everyone, it's time for VLGA Connect and the weekly governance update. TGU, the full team is with us today. It might have been a bit touch and go because I think some of our members have been up late, shall we say. Tony Rownick, good morning to you from Hunt & Hunt Lawyers, our sponsors.
Wasn't me, Chris.
It wasn't.
I got to bed nice and early last night. And was it you, Chris? No?
It wasn't me, so that sort of narrows it down, doesn't it, to Julie Reid. Hello, Julie. How are you feeling today?
Hello. Hi, Chris. Hi, Tony. Yeah, a little bit raspy and feeling really on a high this morning because I had a great night with LG Pro and with all of the local government people last night, celebrating the amazing awards of local government. So I'm feeling maybe a little bit more raspy than normal this morning as a result of that.
Totally because you were talking so much, I gather.
I was talking nonstop, and what I was getting was really good feedback about this podcast, and everybody's saying that they listen to the podcast a lot. So a big shout out to all those listeners and the viewers as well. And to say thanks for your support because I really appreciated the feedback last night on the podcast.
That's really nice feedback. And it's a reminder too to people that you don't have to watch on YouTube. And in fact, many more people listen to the podcast because it's much easier to access, I guess, while you're walking, while you're in the car driving to work, etc. The podcast version is always there as well as the YouTube version. So what were the general themes of the day, Julie, that you picked up on?
Yeah, look, there were some really good speakers yesterday at the conference, and I was really inspired. It was really nice to be back around, surrounded by local government people, talking about, the financial reality of what they're facing at the moment, and the disconnect between what the government's view of local government is in that financial space, as opposed to where the councils feel that they're really at. So we had a really good panel discussion yesterday, including Kelly Grisby from the MAV there. And there was some really interesting discussions about the challenges, but also some of the ideas that are starting to emerge. But those ideas are still very, very limited. We're still looking for lots of solutions as councils to try and address the financial sustainability of our future. And I didn't hear a whole lot of really new and innovative ideas that come out of that, but lots of concerns. There was a discussion about debt and the importance of having some debt, and that debt is not a dirty word. And I think that's what we're realizing is that there can be some debt that councils can wear that might then bring them some income down the track. So, there's some really interesting things come out of that. The other thing, Chris, I know that you'd be excited about that was featured yesterday was about AI. And there was a really great team of Telstra at the conference that were sharing lots of intelligence around AI and how positive that could be into the future as it becomes more sophisticated in helping councils do their work. And there was lots of strategic thinking yesterday at the conference as well. And so lots of talk about the future and what does AI mean for efficiencies that might be created for councils in the future. So look, I was really excited by that. I know that lots of councils were excited about the AI discussion. So it's not all doom and gloom, but it is something that councils are going to have to really get their heads around.
We're seeing nearly every week an example from a council somewhere around Australia where AI is being used for purposes perhaps that we would not have thought of 12 months to 2 years ago, which is a really exciting space at the moment. I'm not seeing a lot of councils adopting AI policies like Warrnambool has done yet.
No.
I think that's still to follow. Yeah. And the debt one's interesting, Julie, because, at the executive and the officer level, I think for quite some time there's been an acceptance that councils under the rate capped environment need to carry some debt. Convincing some councillors of that is a challenge. Often you see, and we'll see it perhaps later this year, councillors getting elected on platforms of financial restraint, not taking on debt to burden communities into the future. So there's a real push-pull there. Tony, what were your thoughts on either those issues or any other things that arose at the conference?
Well, I certainly enjoyed participating in a panel discussion with some great speakers. Liana Thompson chaired the panel, of course, heavily involved in LG Pro, the president there. But we had one of my colleagues, Mark Hayes from Maddox Lawyers, of course, very experienced lawyer. Michelle Kleinhardt, a long-term councillor in the city of Manningham, heavily involved in Algor, of course, as well, was on the panel. Michael Tonta, long-term governance officer at Whittlesea, at City of Melbourne, etc., was able to add, and Sue Wilkinson, of course, currently at City of Yarra CEO. So we had a great discussion about governance. Got thrown a curveball at the last minute because the day before the panel discussion, the Local Government Reforms Bill was introduced to the Parliament. And of course, on the actual day, literally as we were presenting the panel, the Minister was making her second reading speech where she gives the detail of the bill. So we were kind of chasing our tails, but we managed to, I think, give the audience a bit of a sense of what's in there. And of course, many of us have been reading that over the last day or so closely.
So, Tony, this has been expected, of course, and the minister's dropped quite a few hints over recent months about what might be in that bill around a model code of conduct and more ability to sanction individual councillors that were causing health and safety issues or preventing a council from performing its functions. I guess the question would be, is there anything in here that has surprised that we weren't expecting?
I think on balance, the answer to that is no. It's virtually it's all as expected, and in fact, there are some walkbacks, if you like, by the government where they've in fact seemed to have listened to the peak bodies and council feedback and modified some of the content that they'd put out in their consultation paper in January of this year. So we knew that we were going to get mandatory council or training measures beyond just a simple induction training, so annual training for councillors. We've got that. There's been some movement in terms of incorporating that in a 4-month program after taking office rather than 3 months. So we've got a little bit more time than we thought we might, which is good. That mandatory training for leaders, mayors and deputy mayors is in there within 1 month of them taking on those roles, which I think is good. A lot of it will wait for the regulatory detail. So, the content of that training, will it be the soft skill stuff that we've talked about in terms of cohesion, getting on? Will it be, for mayors, how do you chair a meeting? How are you emboldened to jump in and perform that role of helping council adopt the right behaviours? What'll be in the content? Model Council Code of Conduct, we knew that was coming. That is there. Yes, councils can have their local policy additions to that, but clearly that's going to be in place before the October 2024 elections.
So, Tony, what you're saying just on that is there'll be a minimum code of conduct. Councils will be able to add to it, but I assume not take away from that minimum standard.
Look, reading the amendment bill, I think that what'll happen is you won't add to the code. What you'll do is you'll have policies that'll sit alongside the code, is the way I'm understanding it. But again, we'll see more of that in the regulatory detail that's released. I think, the other one that I think is widely sort of welcomed is tougher sanctions through the conduct process. Arbiters are able to now dismiss councillors or suspend councillors for up to 3 months rather than the current, merely 1 month maximum. That was sort of widely called for. There are some interesting provisions in there about disqualification and longer term suspensions available to the minister on advice from a monitor commission of inquiry, and there'll be various views about that in terms of whether that's democratic or anti-democratic. But another provision I think perhaps you asked about, we mightn't have expected, is that if certainly this ability for someone who's been suspended for a misconduct offence to be disqualified from being a mayor or a deputy mayor for a 12-month period, I think that's pretty impactful. And I think some of this other element of the role of the mayor in promoting improved behaviour, that's been strengthened a little by clarifying that the reasonable steps that a mayor takes and carries out in a reasonable manner to, perform that role to promote good behaviour doesn't amount to bullying. So the fact that the mayor keeps pulling up Councillor Tony and saying, hey, I've warned you, you're not doing this right. And look, we're putting in some measures to deal with your failure to observe the standards. That isn't bullying, Councillor Tony. And there's been some, some argument about that and some reticence from mayors in the past, given that element of an allegation of bullying being raised. So I think on balance, and I've been critical of the state government in the past, I think this is, I'd give it an 8 out of 10. I think that largely this is going to improve matters somewhat. I don't think it's going to solve the conduct problem, but I think it puts us in a much stronger place.
So, Tony, do I read correctly? And there's a couple of excellent pieces of analysis available here. One is yours. One is from Rhys Thomas, who's the incoming head of local government policy and projects at the VLGA. I think he takes up the role next week, but he's done a very
really
thorough
hard job.
Yeah. So do I read correctly that, we've had recent cases where conduct panels or arbiters have made decisions that have been then challenged in another legal jurisdiction. Do I read correctly that that is no longer going to be possible?
That's absolutely correct. In terms of a VCAT review from an arbiter decision, that will no longer be available. And I think generally speaking, we take the view that relitigating these matters all again in another forum just prolongs the pain for councils and is, of course, additional cost and expense for ratepayers and everyone else involved. So that opportunity for a VCAT review will no longer be, and very limited opportunity again to go to the Supreme Court. Those limited opportunities will remain.
Okay.
So I think a plus there. I think largely the sector's been calling for that.
So, Julie, any thoughts before we move off this? Because there will be a lot more to say about this.
Yeah, absolutely. I was interested in what Rhys had talked about the extension of the election period as well, which might throw some governance people into, chaos trying to work through. So the bill.
It sounds a bit vague at this point, doesn't it?
Yeah, but he's saying that the bill's going to bring forward the date of the close of the roll. So by approximately 3 weeks. So we're going to watch that one, see what happens, see what that means about, councils having to shift their council meetings to be able to accommodate that
and the trigger for the start of the election period is what's hanging off that, obviously. So right. As I think Rhys points out, the devil will be in the detail of those regulations and the model. I suspect there'll be a full VLGA Connect focus on this bill probably once it passes, so that we can walk through the elements for the sector to fully appreciate what's coming. And of course, the government's intention is that these changes would be in effect for the start of the new council term, which will be November, of course, after the elections in October.
Yeah, so the bill sits for 14 days, I think, after a second reading. So we're really, looking at some traction in a matter of weeks.
Yeah.
And that issue of will the nomination date be moved forward, like the close of the roll? If they did that, that would extend the election period that you're talking about. So all those election policies about, not making major decisions, you know, not sort of promoting councillors during that period. That will be a much longer period and cut in earlier if the nomination periods move forward. But that'll be something we'll have to await in the regulations.
Gosh, I
Mm.
can remember when the election period or the caretaker period first came in. I think it was, someone might correct me, I think it was like 120 days the first time, and then it was 90, and it's been all over the place over the years, hasn't it? So
Yes.
perhaps another shift in the wind.
Yeah, maybe. I
Or,
think that's going to be the case.
Hmm,
The interesting thing, I think, with all of this is what the regulations are going to say, and whether or not there's going to be an opportunity for local government to make comment on the regulations. We're kind of running out of time. The
yeah,
government want to put this in place before the election. We are now on the 3rd of May. You know,
yeah.
it's time's ticking.
Yeah, it's a point well made. And I noticed the government's official release talks about the consultation that has occurred to date. And I just wondered whether they're perhaps indicating that they believe the consultation that's required might have already happened. But I
Maybe.
guess we'll wait. We'll wait to see on that. All right. Thank you for those thoughts. Check out Reese and Tony's articles on LinkedIn for more of the detail, perhaps, of what may or may not be coming once that bill is passed, if indeed it is passed. But we would expect, of course, under the current political environment, that it will. Now, while we're on, sorry,
While we're on the conference,
yeah.
can
Oh,
I
yes.
just give a big shout out? It was so exciting last night, and a big shout out to 2 projects or 2 councils that I thought were outstanding
Yeah.
in the awards that they received. East Gippsland Council, 2 awards for them last night. A very, very excited new CEO in Fiona Weagle out there to see her council being recognised, and a lovely recognition of Anthony Bassford's contribution towards that. But 2 awards, one around shared services with Wellington Shire Council with the IT systems. So an amazing example of where shared services can work really well.
Great.
And a new exciting bridge project that is significant for a local community. And then Greater Dandenong, last night, I was almost in tears, Chris. They were talking about their immunisation program, where they have managed to immunise young children, refugees and asylum seekers, where 10 years ago you would probably get 5% of that population that would be immunised. The council have stepped in because the private sector won't deal with this. The doctors won't do this, won't deal with it. The council have stepped in, and they've now got something like about 95% of those young children that are refugees and asylum seekers that are being immunised and protected, as they, transition into school. So great news stories last night, Chris. I was so excited about those awards. So watch out for those results on the LG Pro website.
Fantastic. Look forward to hearing more about all the award winners. Wouldn't it be nice to see the mainstream media picking up some of those positive stories
I
about
know.
what councils are doing to better their communities? Anyway, I'll just drop that there. Back onto conduct. We've had municipal monitors coming back into Darebin City Council. This announcement was made early this week. Of course, last year, John Watson was there for a considerable period of time, produced a very comprehensive report with a number of recommendations for improvement of practices there and IT system recommendations, etc. The minister has now appointed 2 monitors to, I guess, oversee the continued implementation of those recommendations, but also to take through this period, through the election period and post the election period. They're both in office until, if we can put it that way, until the end of the year. Tony, I know there's been a bit of talk around the sector about which councils might be next to have monitors. I'm not sure people thought we'd have monitors back at Darebin so soon.
Yeah, it's an interesting move, and it seems to be a follow on from John Watson's report from January 2023. So firstly, 2 monitors. One name be very familiar, Ross Millard, of course, ex-local government inspectorate, Department of Planning, Community Development. Also June Anstey, who might be an unfamiliar name in Victoria, but led the was the president of the Councillor Conduct Tribunal in Queensland. Isn't a lawyer from Brisbane. So they're the two monitors. The announcement from the minister is, we still need to improve governance processes and practices. The terms of reference there, apart from there's the usual governance terms of reference, like, the monitoring the interactions between councillors and staff, amongst councillors, monitoring councillors' understanding of their statutory role. Those things are in there, but also I think picking up elements of John Watson's report, like what are the outstanding actions from that report? And they've actually explicitly mentioned IT and staff accommodation investment. So I think there were two aspects that John Watson highlighted in January 2023. You have a sense that the minister is being advised that maybe there's not the correct rate of implementation or attention being given to those, and the monitors are going to come in and have a look at that.
So those, as we said, two monitors in place until the end of the year, and the terms of reference have been published on the Local Government Victoria website. Another conduct matter, just in passing perhaps, because I haven't read the full detail of this, there is a report out from Melton City Council, published in their council papers last week, of an arbiter's findings against one councillor there. Councillor Ashley Vandenberg has been found to have engaged in misconduct. There's a 14-day suspension currently underway of that councillor, and some apologies were ordered to be made, verbal and written. Again, no surprise perhaps, all in relation to some Facebook posts that happened last year. Now, Tony, I don't know if you want to say too much, because I think you were involved in this process, weren't you?
Yeah, look, I represent the applicants in the process, but yeah, it was social media, Facebook posts again, and so without commenting too much on the specifics, it's to say again, councillors, we have to be really careful about the comments that we make in our Facebook posts, regardless of whether we think that we're doing them in a private capacity or not. When we're commenting on the council, it's likely to be seen as us acting in the capacity of a councillor, and the standards of behaviour will apply. But yeah, that's been a long process, I think, and I think all the parties will be glad to see the back of that, and so they can concentrate on moving forward towards this election cycle.
Well, it's that issue we've talked about before, haven't we? These Facebook posts, I think, were May, possibly even earlier, of 2023. So we're a year on, and now just a few months out from an election before this has been finally determined. Although I note a comment in the report from the arbiter, Tony, that one of those posts is potentially subject to, I think she called it pre-litigation action, which sort of gives the sense that there might be more to come in relation to some of that material.
Look, there are separate proceedings with another councillor who wasn't involved in the proceedings and the respondent.
Okay, stay tuned on that. We might leave that one there, but if you want to read that report, it is long. I must admit, I've put it to one side because I didn't have time. It's published in the council's papers from their meeting last week. I haven't found it on the LGV website yet, but that will catch up in due course, I'm sure. Julie, I'm sure you'll be interested in this one. Two stories from The Age this week about apparently government plans to remove planning powers from councils if they don't meet housing targets, followed the next day, or might have been the day after, by evidence that, and this is the headline, councils are not the housing villain as developers shelve construction. What do you make of this?
That's right. Yeah, it is really interesting, because the fact that it was only the sort of the day after. And there's lots of evidence coming forward. RMIT have come out, a professor of public policy, David Hayward, saying that the lack of approvals by councils was not the main issue. It's the developers not completing what they have had already approved. And we've heard this before. We've heard this before in this argument. And he's saying this is further evidence that the Allen government decision to focus on local government planning activity as a villain is misguided. So I really honed in on that, and I thought that was really interesting, and it was really good to see people of that kind of status coming out and providing those kind of important bits of information. So it's interesting. Obviously, they're having lots of discussions at the moment with the development industry, from what I can gather from the report. They're also talking, the government, about this universal livability charge across all postcodes, which would replace the infrastructure contribution charge that currently only applies to the metropolitan fringe. So they are looking at changing that. But again, that means more costs. And there's been a bit of a criticism that those costs are going to be then, be on the burden of the person who, buys the property. It'll just be shifted in that space, but it is going to be, they're looking at that, and they're looking at what they can do. Another interesting thing that I saw in their report, which I was aware of, that there was a committee, I think, that was set up, or that was set up by the government a couple of years ago, that we're looking into charges, and looking into, in particularly, the developer contribution system, and whether or not there could be a new system put in place that might be an off-the-shelf type system that would apply to all councils, which would be so much simpler than the current developer contribution system that we have. So that was mentioned in the report as well.
Yeah, the suggestion that it would replace the GAIC, the Growth Areas Infrastructure Contribution Charge, with one that's more broadly applied. So I think the sector would welcome that sort of approach, wouldn't it?
And they're saying suburbs and towns. So my understanding is that it would apply Victoria-wide, not just in metropolitan Melbourne. So that's really, really good. I've always been a keen advocate for that, and particularly because, developer contributions and this infrastructure contribution charge, I don't know whether it's been proven that they're really working, and there's such a gap between what you collect and what councils still need to fund. And it's really not working, maybe, I think, as well as what it should do. So I think that, the discussion and the reconsideration of that by the government, I think, would be welcomed by local government. I think so.
Tony, the old sources within and close to the government. Carrot and stick measures are being considered to pressure councils into approving more housing, yet the figures would show that is not the problem. I forget the numbers exactly, but it might be nearly half of the approvals that have been granted by councils have either been shelved or not started by the building industry.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is firstly, this, as you point out, this is a deliberate leak out of government to test the waters, if you like. As you say, sources close to and within the government. We're thinking of targets. Let's see what the reaction is. Why? Well, they have to do something because they've announced their 80,000 dwellings a year target. They're falling short. Last year we did 54,000 dwellings. This year we're forecast to do 52,000. 2025 we're forecast to do 55. So we need at least 57 just to stay where we are, keep up with population growth. That's not even cutting into the shortage of housing, but we're actually going backwards. As you point out, Chris and Julie, some councils have been at times NIMBY-like, but there tends to, those decisions tend to get reversed at VCAT. It's not the problem that there aren't sufficient approvals at a council level. It's the decision of developers to start. And that's purely, as you'd expect, it's purely based on economic conditions and cost versus reward. And the government needs to tackle the high cost of construction, labour, material. Some of these things are, internationally influenced, but some of these things are very much driven by regulation and cost. For decades, it was always cheaper to buy into an apartment than it was to buy a house. Construction costs per square metre for an apartment, and I'm not talking about, the penthouse apartment with a view over the city. I'm talking about generally an apartment in the city was cheaper, and it was the entry level than a house. Now, it's more expensive to build an apartment. Why is it more expensive to build an apartment? Well, there's so much more regulation. There's penalty rates when you go over certain particular heights, those sorts of things. So we've got to tackle construction costs, because it's all very well to say, we want more high scale, high density, high rise housing in Broadmeadows Activity Centre and Epping and around Epping, but no one's going to build that if the cost of building it is more than what you can sell it for. And so if you're going to replace the GAIC, the Growth Area Infrastructure Charge, with a much broader infrastructure charge, and then as you, Chris and Julia pointed out, there may well be some merit in doing that, but that's another cost to the developer that will create a hesitance in starting and be passed on need to be passed on in prices. So the government in turn going to have to find some other ways to reduce costs, to make that to bring that encouragement. Used to be buying off the plan. Remember all those ads about stamp duty savings off the plan? They were really walked back a few years ago. So maybe some things like that might encourage a reduction in some of the costs and tackling some of these. There aren't enough quarries around metropolitan Melbourne. Every time a quarry is exhausted, no one wants a quarry built near them.
Because everyone,
you got to travel. You got to drive to Bendigo to get material that you need for construction in Melbourne. So, it's a nasty problem that the government's got. But $4,000 per square metre to build, a dwelling in Melbourne at the moment.
It's interesting, isn't it? The other thing that's interesting in all of this, Chris, and I honed in on this because of my interest in London, but one source in the government said that they wanted to sort of learn from London and Sydney that have housing targets that have been introduced for councils at the moment. And I believe the Planning Department has also met with the UK Authority Transport for London to compare some notes around strategies for higher density around train stations. I remember back,
Melbourne 2030.
Talking. Yeah, I mean, this has always been around about higher densities around train stations, but also to the missed opportunities with some of these the level crossing removals and the need to plan for making sure that there is an opportunity to build around train stations. I know that at Nunawading, when we working at Whitehorse Council at the time, were arguing for the road rail separation, we argued at the time to say you need to future-proof this. We need to be able to enable high density living in that area and plan for it now. But it just seemed to fall on deaf ears because it was just going to be too costly or whatever. And now we're talking about it again. So it is really important. And I think, regardless of what Tony's talking about the cost, etc., I think that, we've still got a lot to learn around the density around railway stations.
Okay, enough said on that, perhaps, other than to plug the next global executive panel that's coming from the VLGA and LGRU next Thursday, the 9th of May, online from 5:30 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. This panel on affordable and sustainable housing will have an Irish CEO and a Scottish CEO talking about how they're tackling this very problem we've been talking about, as well as Rushta Halith, a General Manager from the City of Melbourne, and a representative of the Regional Australia Institute for a regional perspective on this problem. So that is a must watch next Thursday on the topic of affordable and sustainable housing. Okay, let's move on. There's lots happening. We don't need to talk about all of this in detail. I might just throw these out. And Tony, Julie, if you have a comment, want to say something about them, by all means. A Victorian council this week has incurred the wrath of the Premier of Tasmania. This is not something you see every day, but Colac Otway Shire Council has apparently been working with Tasmanian government representatives on potentially using the Port of Apollo Bay to transport stock feed to farmers on King Island who are doing it really tough with prolonged dry conditions. The council has announced this week that the port is not geared up for
No.
operations of the scale that is required here, and they're talking about pursuing some other options. The Tasmanian Premier's given them a whack in the media, saying it's an extremely disappointing decision. Tony, have you ever seen a Premier of another state have a go at a council somewhere else like
No,
this?
I actually haven't. Jeremy Rockcliffe, he's not happy, he's not impressed. The Tasmanian officials apparently didn't get the memo, the email before they there was a public announcement at Colac Otway about, we won't be able to allow freight to go through the port of Apollo Bay. And there are other ports in the vicinity, Portland,
Commercial ports?
that could handle freight of this nature. They're a little more expensive, I think, for the people of King Island in terms of location, etc. But it was I think it was the Premier of Tasmania's announcement in the media or comments in the media were designed for the King Island constituency and the people of Tasmania, not necessarily really directed at Colac Otway Shire. But nonetheless, interesting.
And it irritated me, Chris, because, again, the council was targeted. And I know that the council are the port manager, but the Department of Transport and Planning are the port owner. And, Colac have been working with the department to resolve, to try and resolve the issue. And together they've identified these risks associated with using that port. So together they've decided, no, it's too risky. They need to go elsewhere. But where's the whack? Where's the whack for the state government as well?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's a state asset, but perhaps the council's an easier target, Julie.
Maybe. I don't know. This irritates me. But, I think it's really unfair that they got targeted or singled out when really it was a joint discussion and obviously a joint decision about whether or not because the council were really wanting to help the residents of King Island, and it's difficult in that sort of situation when they're not going to undertake risky things that are going to cause issues in the future. They have to understand risk management in these spaces.
Yeah, so that happened. Also down on the South Coast last week, in fact, the Mayor of Queenscliff, the Borough of Queenscliff, Isabel Tolhurst, stepped aside. I think a surprise announcement at the council meeting that as she prepares for the arrival of her second child, she was unable to give the role the full 100% attention that she prides herself on doing there. So she's stepped aside as mayor. Ross Ebbels has been elected back into the mayoralty, former mayor, of course, there at Queenscliff. And I just wanted to note that and wish Isabel all the very best for the months ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Not surprised at her decision around that. It's probably a smart decision, and no doubt she will come back.
Yeah. Let's hope so. There's a councillor course now available on dealing with disinformation, Tony and Julie. The MAV has teamed up with the University of Melbourne here. This is to prepare councillors and council candidates, the story says, for I guess, tackling those 5G, 15-minute city conspiracy theories that are popping up all the time.
Yeah, interesting move. 4-week university course, $1,500. And it's called Recognising and Managing Disinformation, as you say. My old alma mater, Uni of Melbourne, and MAV got together. Look, I'd be interested. This would be an interesting course, I reckon, but I can't see there'll be a huge amount of take up. But and I think, to be honest, the conspiracy theorists are just going to see this as just proof that we're all being indoctrinated, aren't they?
I thought the same.
It's useful to have methods to tackle this disinformation, I guess, and there's some real merit for us to be educated on some of the ways to do that. So kudos to the MAV and Melbourne Uni.
Yeah, and it was interesting that Councillor Jim Child came out. He was the mayor during the time when the meeting got halted up at Yarra Ranges. And he's really supportive of this and thinks that it should be mandatory for all councillors. So interesting that in the discussion around mandatory training, whether or not something like this should be part of that mandatory professional development training.
Well, I guess it's not much of a stretch to see some elements of this at least being brought into that training, perhaps. We'll have to wait and see. So that also happened this week. Moonee Valley City Council is now, or will be from next week, the equal third leader in Victorian local government for female representation. 6 of the 9 councillors will be women after the swearing in of Jessica O'Neill, who won the countback to replace Cam Nation, who sensationally quit in the middle of a council meeting a few weeks back.
So we obviously welcome that councillor-elect, and Councillor Pearce Tyson, the mayor, is obviously really keen on having that councillor role being filled. I actually got to speak to Councillor Tyson this week, Chris and Tony, and talk to him about Moonee Valley and the great work that they're doing out there. So shout out to Councillor Tyson. We are really excited, obviously, or I am really excited about the fact that we've now got that situation where they're the equal third leader in local government for that female representation. So it'll be interesting to see, and we're watching this really closely about how that shifts at the next election in terms of those equal representations across local government councillors.
Congratulations to Jessica and welcome aboard for a few months at least until the elections in October. A couple of passing notes. I've reported on these on the Local Government News Roundup if you'd like to know more, or head to the Roundup website. Another councillor, Tony, you'll be interested to know, in the country has been removed from office for not attending 3 consecutive council meetings without a leave of absence. This has occurred at Upper Hunter Shire in New South Wales. A female councillor removed there who says she's going to challenge that. I'd sort of say good luck. We'll see how that plays out. That council now has to make a decision about whether $125,000 would be well worth spending to fill the position through a by-election with just 4 months to go in New South Wales to elections. I suspect they'll ask the minister for a dispensation there. And the new mayor of a couple of new mayor stories out of Queensland. The new mayor of the Sunshine Coast has already been targeted by cyber criminals. People have set up false social media accounts in her name, and they're soliciting money. I'm not sure how you sort of set up a mayor to solicit money, but there you go. They're trying that. And the new mayor of Townsville, Troy Thompson, is already under an integrity cloud with the Office of the Independent Assessor looking into claims that his military history claims he's made during his election campaign have been unable to be backed up. That's an interesting story as well, folks.
Isn't it? Like Townsville's a very, defence forces focused area. If there's a lot of bases around Townsville. Do a lot of work with Defence Bank, who are very, very prominent up there. Seems that Mr. Thompson, new mayor, promoted really heavily on Facebook his military service history. There've been some questions asked about that. Those posts that he had on Facebook about that military service have been removed. He says, look, I've lost or I've forgotten my my military service number, and I've made a personal information request to the Department of Defence. So it's possible that that they'll come back and he'll have his proof of service. But if not, I think he's probably got a lot of explaining to do to a community that is very military represented, and I think that position of mayor might be under threat if he can't substantiate.
Yeah. We'll watch that one with great interest. Also, an ICAC finding of corrupt conduct against some former employees and contractors of the Inner West Council in Sydney and Transport for New South Wales. That's played out in the media this week. You can find some reporting on that from the ABC and others if you want to dig into that. I think that's all we've got time for this week, unless Tony or Julie, you have anything you'd like to add before we wrap up.
No, nothing from me.
On the road a bit next week, so I get to see a bit of the country. I'm heading up to Gannawarra, but which will be nice, and And then it's only a few weeks for men. I'll do a Cam Nation on here. It won't be for long term, everyone, but I'll announce that I'm going on holidays.
Excellent. All right. We won't be shocked because you've been telling us
Yeah,
about it
told
for a
you
number
now.
of months.
And
So-
I'm getting busier and busier with all my training, Chris. So, and I can feel what's coming as a wave of extra training for Julie A. Reid and Associates coming forward. So
That's good. We like to keep you busy.
Yeah, that's right.
Excellent. All right. So thank you, Julie. Thank you, Tony. Thank you to Hunt and Hunt Lawyers for sponsoring TGU from VLGA Connect. Thank you to you, the viewer and the listener, for your continued support for the program. Don't forget the Global Executive Panel from the VLGA and LGIU next Thursday. Registrations are open now, and they're filling pretty fast, I've got to tell you, for that event on Thursday night. You can check out the details on the VLGA website. We'll be back with more VLGA Connect very soon. Until next time, bye for now.